Welcome to the Unpacking Sunday podcast, where we take a deeper look at what God is speaking to you, to our church, and to the world around us. So grab a coffee, sit back, and let's unpack it together. Hello, church. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome back to Unpacking Sunday. I have a special guest with us this week. So we have Steve Fox here, who is going to be recording with us this week as we unpack the sermon. So Steve, thanks for being here.
And this is a total surprise because I just walked into the church to do something totally different. And you approached me and said, hey,
let's do this.
Yes.
So I literally just threw this on you. So I appreciate your willingness to come in and say, but timely enough.
Because I just finished listening to the podcast of the sermon on Sunday while I was driving around today.
Okay, amazing. So that's great. Amazing. Well, Pastor Mike is away. He is in Ottawa right now. And I was thinking about recording with him, but it seems like he's kind of in the middle of this huge big protest thing and he's out. So I just kind of pulled an audible. And Steve, here we are.
And I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you, man. It's gonna be great. For people who may not know you in the church, give us just like a quick synopsis of your life. You're married, you have children.
I have two great boys, and we followed them here. They came here in their late teens looking for a youth group to get involved with. And if you have kids that are interested in being involved in a church and they find a place they want to be, I'd encourage any parent to follow your kids and do everything you can to encourage them in their faith. And we ended up here. And now they are off to school and they aren't here so much. And my wife, Charlene, and myself are here.
Amazing. And that's so fun. That's so cool. And you play on the worship team with me. You play acoustic guitar and you play bass a lot. I convinced you to learn how to play bass, and that seems to be one of the primary ways you're serving these days. But
and I'm even liking it.
It's a real blessing to me. So playing bass is really fun. So that's awesome. And one thing, Steve, that you've really encouraged me on is that I love your heart, and you are always so willing to serve and jump on, and you're always so encouraging. So yeah, I am so grateful that you're here, and I'm so grateful that you get to be on my team. And then today I'm glad that you're in the studio with me here to record. So awesome. I'm a big Steve fan, so I was really eager to jump on this opportunity to have you on the podcast.
Oh, that's really nice. When we first started coming here, I could not believe how excellent the music was at this church. And to even be on the stage with all the musicians on the team is just an honor. And I'm just trying to keep up.
Oh, I think you're doing great. You're doing great. Awesome. Well, hey, so let's unpack this sermon. We jumped ahead a little bit further than our first sermon. I think Pastor Mike maybe covered. It was up there like 10 verses or so, as opposed to the first 3. So, and we got into this the second part of Jonah as we know initially he ran away, and there was this space that was the town that he got a ticket to again. Was it?
Tarshish.
Tarshish, that's what it is, Tarshish. And there's Joppa, which means beauty too, right? Which is the perfect term for this idea of distraction, something beautiful that can draw our eyes away from God.
Yeah.
But then Jonah, as he finds himself on this boat, and I find it so comical that he fell into this deep sleep, So, and there's something spiritual there. Of course, there's definitely like a parallel to this, as we know that Jesus, in his fulfillment of a lot of these things, as he did, there was, as Jesus fell in, like his deep sleep for 3 days and everything like that, right? So, but as this emerges, there's these parallels, but at the same point, there's this thing going on where he seems to be really comfortable in this state of disobedience. And there's interesting there how I think there's something poignant to look at how often, you would think this guy who they're in this storm, which he is aware is created by God, but he's in this deep sleep. It's like there's something to do about a hardening of the heart, or or so often this parallel of as we distance ourselves from God, we can find ourselves kind of in this state of kind of comatose living, right?
Right.
So,
And that was one of the major themes Pastor Mike brought out,
mm-hmm.
Trying to bring the story of Jonah from so long ago into our modern times,
Mm-hmm.
is the sin of passivity,
Mm-hmm.
and apathy and so forth. And there's so many things in our society that allow us and enable us to become apathetic in our
Mm-hmm.
faith. And the enemy of our souls is quite content if we're ineffective, if all we do is go to work 8 to
Mm-hmm.
5 or 9 to 5, whatever it may be, come home, have dinner, watch a couple TV shows, go to sleep, and then repeat that, and maybe come to church on the weekend, but it doesn't affect our lives or affect how we live our lives. And we miss the whole point of our faith if we allow that to be our routine.
Absolutely. I think there's something really important there as we kind of press into these later themes of obedience, and like what Pastor Mike said about like what would it really look like if we as believers on an individual level really stepped into obedient living. And now I'm just getting it jumbled up in my mind, but did Mike talk about how Jesus says, "If you love me, obey my commands"? Was that part of his sermon?
I don't remember that part.
Okay. I think maybe I was listening to something else, but that really hit me about this. Like, that's what Jesus says is that, like, if you love me, obey my commands, obey what I've asked of you to do. And that just kind of was something that was kind of sitting in the back of my mind, because I think a lot of Christians, we profess that we love Jesus, but it's that next step of actually a visceral response to his calling, to his commands, to his word, is really where a lot of Christians kind of find themselves idling,
Yeah, and we sing these songs, and it's easy to sing the song and say the words, but then there's that act of obedience where you have to make conscious choice on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-by-moment basis, to demonstrate your love for the Lord.
Yeah. It reminds me of this quote from a movie, and I won't say the name of the movie, but it's just this idea of the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And I think, like, on this idea of if we have Jesus who commands us, who says, if you love me, do what I ask of you. And there's kind of then this idea of like obedience and response to, living a life of our trajectory is towards being closer to Jesus and closer to God. But there's the same point of this idea of if indifference being a major part of a lot of people's Christian walk, kind of this idea. So I think that's there was some really sobering thoughts from as Mike preached on Sunday about this, like how we can just find ourselves in this apostate type of posture towards God, where it's like we maybe give him a Sunday morning, in our walk, but really and we've talked about this so much on the podcast, what Sunday should be is the celebration of how we're responding to God in an obedient way through the week, and this overflow of encouraging others to kind of continue fighting the good fight. But so often we approach church in this kind of filling station kind of mentality of get my fix that'll last me till next Sunday, and that is really the reverse idea of what our Sunday morning services should be. So, but yeah.
And Pastor Mike was sharing his personal testimony of how the Lord had brought him through different phases and seasons in his life, and fulfilling a promise that his parents had when he was really, really young.
Right.
And you have to listen to the podcast again to catch on to it. But just demonstrating and testifying of the Lord's faithfulness to actually bring his life to what God had purposed for him.
Oh, yeah.
And continue to do that.
Yeah.
And I mean, my story is different and your story is different, but the theme is the same. The Lord is always faithful to what He has planned for us, and even through those seasons where we mess it up, we are distant from Him. He's able to come into that situation, no matter where you're at, and if you turn towards Him, I think Pastor Mike used the word turn. Turn towards Him again and come back. He takes you and he gets you where you're at and brings you forward again into His plan. I love that.
I love that too. Yeah, I'm always blown away by hearing that story where, and I think like Mike even mentioned, as a parent, having this like seed of truth and this prophetic this prophetic kind of thing in your hearts as parents, and to holding on to it for the right moment is profound to me. That's just the faithfulness of His folks. It's just like that's wild to really, for them to hold on to that, and in this moment kind of have this kind of mic drop moment. You see what I did there? Right. But for them to really we actually knew and been waiting for this.
And be able to keep it quiet. So you may have a child that's not going in the direction that this word is talking about. And rather than use that and somehow weaponizing it and say, wow, but God meant you to be this.
Of course, yeah, for sure.
Just holding it close to their hearts and just trusting God to bring what He spoke to come to pass. Wow, that's faith.
Yeah, 100%. Right? Just as we're kind of on this theme of obedience and of repentance, do you have any kind of like stories or things in your heart and your mind where you kind of feel like you've had these pivotal moments where God was kind of calling you into something, and maybe there was some resistance, but you found yourself kind of, saying yes to Him, and then, the result. Is there any stories kind of like this, kind of like stepping out in faith that you can think of? Maybe following your kids to the church was one, but
sure. Yeah. But I mean, I can go back to maybe a similar period in time before I was in my 20s, and I was involved in church. Since I was my parents were Christians and so forth, and we were at summer camps and all these types of things. But I got through high school, and I'll tell you, I was lost. I didn't have plans to go to university, which I ended up doing. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I was working in just a basic job. And then there was just this time where at the church I was attending, some ministers came and God moved in amazing ways. And I realized that this God that I acknowledged, this God that I sang about and that I learned about in Sunday school and so forth was actually real and actually present and active in people's lives. And it's too long a story to put onto the podcast. But the point is, I realized I had a point of decision where I had to acknowledge this moment and say, okay, God, I'm gonna invest time in figuring out who you really are and what you really want me to do with my life versus just continuing on with the same. And because my life has never been the same because I made a choice and God honored that very simple step of faith and so on. I would do it all again. Wow. Yeah.
I'm reminded of kind of the story of how I came to be here at the church and how, I don't know if you heard this, a lot of people in the church probably don't know this, but I was working as a care aide at a organization called Bethesda, working with people with disabilities, and just loved those guys so much. But I had been there, going on 14 years and put my wife through school and had our first couple of kids and everything like that. And I just really felt like this burning in me to say, like, Lord, I feel like I'm in a bit of a wilderness. I know you've placed this music in me, you've placed worship in me, and I don't feel like what I'm doing here is really what you've created me for, you know? And so, and like, I don't feel like I'm living up to the potential that you really have called me to. And with all these things that I, you know, heard as prophetic words and, you know, like about doing music and about, you know, that kind of thing, music for a generation and those sorts of things. Right. So, I, I can remember out of frustration, I said to my wife, I said, if I could do it all over again, I would have loved to gone to like one of those worship schools, Hillsong or Bethel or something like that. And my wife, in her infinite wisdom, said, "Well, you're not dead." So we can really look at it. I'm like, I'm in my 30s, you know, and that kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm not a kid anymore, you know, I have responsibilities, but we, we kind of bunkered down. We saved a little bit, and my church actually that we were attending put a fundraiser on for me, and I was able to raise some money. And I went to the Bethel School of Worship in 2013, and I was there for I think it was like 10 days, right? But I went there, kind of coming out of this season of just career work, raising a family, not really having like a really intentional relationship with Jesus. Like I was a Christian, absolutely, but I wasn't deeply pursuing His, you know, the word and His will for my life. And that I just kind of was, right. I was stuck in that state. Mm-hmm. Anyways, and God just got a hold of me so profoundly in that 10 days that I was there. I just wept the first 3 days in worship. Like it was like I'd forgotten how much I loved worship and stuff. And, you know, and under the teaching and under the just some of the lessons, things I learned. I did a songwriting thing there and everything. It was just kind of a calling back, getting a bit of a reset to, you know, almost a decade of being away from this kind of pursuit of what I felt God had called me to when I was younger. Anyways, I came home from that, changed. I was absolutely changed. And I can remember with my wife saying, like, God's doing something and he's drawing us into something. So let's just pray about that. And so we did. We prayed for a year. We just, you know, just kind of kept on going on.
A whole year.
We just kept on going on. We just kept praying, saying, Lord, we know that something's up. And then there was, with like almost a year to the day where we started praying, we felt kind of something break in us and just say, okay, we think it's coming. You know, like this is nothing tangible. This is just heart response stuff. And so we just kind of remember praying in our kitchen saying, Lord, we say yes to your plans, whatever they are. We just, you know, whatever this looks like. Yeah. We say yes, whatever the next thing is. And we know, we feel a sense that something's coming. And it just on a side note, this whole thing was just being still and knowing. It wasn't striving. There wasn't, you know, I don't even think I fasted in the whole year or whatever about this sort of thing, but it was waiting on God and knowing that He would be faithful to His word.
And you didn't go to other classes
no,
courses or
just
anything?
Worked, just worked and we prayed and we just waited. And I did start like a worship service at my church in the evenings, 'cause I couldn't be involved with worship regularly on Sunday mornings because I always worked on Sunday mornings at the care home. So, anyways, we gotta wrap the episode up here. But it was a week after we prayed that prayer, after we felt something break, that I started getting calls from churches.
That's amazing.
And I got called from 5 churches in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And Cariboo was one of those churches, and I kind of negotiated with God. A couple of them were on the island. One was kind of like in Alberta, I think, or whatever. It was a while. I can't even really remember. It seems like forever ago. But we said, Lord, we feel like you've placed us here in this community with our friends. We'd love to not move away. And then got a call from a church in Burnaby, you know. So it was just kind of really a wild time to have this kind of physical change happen.
Yeah.
And like, very long story short, I got a call from somebody at the church who said, we have been talking to different worship communities and different worship pastors for months, and your name keeps coming up. So would you be interested in coming in for an interview for our worship pastor position? And so, you know, this was when Pastor Paul was here and everything, but it was this really like, I was just so convinced in that moment that there was nothing that I needed to do except for wait on God. And just the way that He directed that whole time in our lives. And then, you know, so I didn't have to send a resume. I just waited on God. And I got hired here, and that was 10 years ago. So, and I've been here ever since. Right? I just stay till it's awkward. But really, he did the same thing with us buying our house too. We were in a townhouse and we prayed. We prayed every night at dinner, Lord, if, we felt too small for our house when we moved in, but we were there for 12 years. And, we had 2 of our 3 kids, like as babies in that townhouse, 1,100 square feet. But then we just prayed that we knew that in God's timing, he would provide a way, he would provide the people, and he absolutely did. And we found ourselves in this like amazing little house that we love, right? And it's just like, it was just waiting and trusting on him. So there's something to be said about obedience and about stepping out. And if God is speaking to you about something, there's something about trusting in the fact that he is the beginning and the end of it, and that he will lead every footstep. As soon as you take a step of faith, as soon as your foot leaves the grounds, you're in God's hands, because you're in his plan, right? Yeah. So, and that's something that I've learned dramatically in my life, is that steps of faith shouldn't have to be scary, because God's preparing the way. It's just when our faith is when we're unsure of God's willingness or his ability. But if we can be grounded in his goodness, be grounded in his faithfulness, and know that he provides for the birds, he provides for the flowers, and he will provide for us, that he has good things in store, that he will continue to lead, he will continue to provide. It's just he's requiring trust from us to be still and know.
And he'll do it.
He'll do it.
Yeah.
He'll do it. Well, that's it for us today. Church, we love you. And thanks, Steve, for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
It was really fun to have you. And we'll see you again real soon.
Bye.
Unpacking Sunday is a podcast of Cariboo Road Christian Fellowship Church. If you're interested in more information, please check out our website at www.crcfchurch.com.